Has launched the campaign to try and counter the extremists.
Now speaking out to denounce terror and extremism.
30,000 people formed a human chain in the south this afternoon in the name of peace.
We're asking if religious intolerance is on the rise.
We believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right.
Giving a message that Islam is a religion of peace.
We must all endeavor to spread love and a sense of community.
A very good afternoon and welcome to this very special edition of Press Point, coming to you live from the studios of Ghana Television in Accra. On this edition of the program, we look at a very important issue, that is the global threat of religious extremism and its impact across the world. Today, the word Islam has unfortunately become associated with extremism. But why is this the case, and what is Islam's true teaching on peace and religious harmony? So join us for the next hour and a half as we bring you a special insight into the issues affecting us across Africa and speak to our guests in the studio and around the world. I am here with my co-host Farouk, who is visiting Africa for the very first time. Farouk, let me say Akwaba.
Majasi, Akwaba, thank you very much indeed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, we're going live from the studio here in Ghana, in Accra, the capital city. A beautiful studio and lovely people indeed. We're coming live at this time in the afternoon, wherever you are in the world, evening, afternoon, morning. We welcome you indeed. Today, again, your participation on this show will be extremely important. Of course, show runs with your contribution. You send us your emails to presspoint@mt.tv. You send us your tweets using the hashtag PressPointMTA. But also on top of that, we're also receiving phone calls from you. The phone call number that you will, inshallah, be ringing is the following number, 0302 770 111. That's the number if you're calling from within Ghana. I'll repeat the number, 0302 770 111. And if you're calling from outside Ghana, please call our UK number, which is as follows, 0044 208 687 8010. And lastly, if you want to send the text messages, send to the following number, 0505 294834. A lot to look forward to. You share with us and we share with the worldwide MT audience. Ibrahim.
Thanks very much, Farouk. So on today's show, we'll be joined by a number of guests in the studio throughout. Joining us will be Maulvi Mohammed bin Sal, who is Naib Amir of the Ahmadiyya Mission Ghana, let me say Deputy Amir, and also IKJC, who is a journalist and senior member of the Ahmadiyya community Ghana. In the second half, we'll be joined by Yaqub Abubakar, who is the current headmaster of TI Ahmadiyya Secondary School in Kumasi. So we begin with the first part, that is the rise of religious extremism. In the first section, we will briefly look at the state of religious extremism around the world to understand the issue better. In part two, we look at extremism within Africa and understand what are Islam's true teachings in this regard. And in part three, we look at the Ahmadiyya community and how they are speaking out against extremism and making efforts to unite religions. Farouk, you have some stories.
Thank you very much indeed. Of course, the first part, as you mentioned before, is about extremism and how extremism has swamped the whole world, really. Now, the first story intentionally we picked up, which is from an unusual place, China. And the story actually is in China Daily, if you can see my screen there. It says, court convicts 39 of spreading religious extremism in Xinjiang province. And the criminals were also convicted of organizing, leading and participating in terrorist organizations, inciting ethnic hatred, ethnic discrimination and illegally making guns, the court said. Then again, the next story is in fact on the Guardian newspaper, quoting the Prime Minister, the ex-Prime Minister of Great Britain, Tony Blair, who says extremist religion is at root of 21st century wars. So clearly he is saying that the wars of this century are going to be based on religion. That's what his views are. Now, I picked up one of the comments there by somebody called Gilliam. Now, that comment is very interesting, I think, to balance this thing up. This is a very useful comment. They say that, yes, we need to oppose extremism, but unless you find work and hope for a generation of young men across North Africa and the Middle East, you are going to get more people behaving extremely. So clearly, the problem is not just extremism on the face of it. There's a lot of things in the background to look at as well. And then going forward with one of the articles on the CNN World blog section, where a lady called Maha Hussein Aziz, who is a professor of politics in New York University, and also she is advisory board chairwoman of Afghanistan's first university e-mentoring program. Now she has brought attention to something again, rather not very usual, in the sense she's saying that we should be also concerned about extremism in a different dimension, talking about Buddhist extremism, for example, in Sri Lanka and Myanmar. Says these Buddhist monks have actually attacked in 2013 2 churches, and also another group within Sri Lanka has attacked Muslims. Similarly, Myanmar has scores of deaths of people as well who've been killed and ousted from their homes because of their religion. So clearly the problem is pervasive, not only with one religion, or does not have any boundaries in terms of countries. And again, going forward with one of the Pew Research, research done by Pew Research Organization, a very reputable organization in the world. A simple question they asked to a lot of Muslims from 11 Islamic countries, and the question was quite simple. The question was, how concerned are you about Islamic extremism? And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, the answer was, as you can see on my screen, vast majority of Muslims think they're very concerned about extremism. In your country, Ghana, which is West Africa, on its north side is Senegal, another West African country, and people over there were most concerned in the world at the moment in terms of Muslim population. So I think it would be very timely if we go to watch a short video report which has been prepared for you by, in collaboration, MTA collaborating with GBC. That report has been produced to reflect somehow that how extremism has affected the whole world now. Let's take a look.
Here in Africa, religion plays an integral part in the lives of millions of the people. A majority of the people practice their faith in peace and harmony. Throughout West Africa, Christians, Muslims, and people of other faiths have lived together in peace and harmony. Here in Ghana, the major religions have lived together and have enjoyed true interreligious harmony, and efforts are being made to ensure that this harmony is maintained throughout the nation. There are those factions, however, who use the name of religion to propagate violence and their own political motives. Throughout history, people have perpetrated extreme and violent acts in the name of religion. Be it Christianity, Islam, Judaism, or Hinduism, all these faiths have at one point or another been used as an umbrella to justify acts of brutality. History is rife with examples. From the Crusades instigated by the Catholic Church, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where 30,000 French Calvinist Protestants were killed, and even more recently, the religious tension in Northern Ireland. In today's world, terrorism is a global concern, so much so that governments all over the world have set up task forces to deal with the threat of extremist fanatics. It is also a major public concern. A survey conducted by the European Commission indicated that 33% of Europeans stated terrorism as a major challenge to security in the European Union.
There's a patchwork of areas of threats. North Africa, we have Libya, we have Egypt, because when you look at the eastern part of Egypt, when you look at the Sinai Peninsula, there is an extremist group over there called Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, helpers or partisans of Jerusalem. Then the larger Middle East, Iraq is still volatile, Syria is volatile today. More than 20 different nationalities are fighting within the ranks of those hardline elements. So I think on a scale of 10, I think the threat today is more palpable than it was.
The rise in religious extremism also has social implications, creating religious tension and disrupting inter-religious peace. Unfortunately, more often than not, the Islamic faith has been associated with many of these acts of extremism. Since 9/11, there has been a huge rise in the number of extremist activities. which has brought the name of Islam into disrepute by people who falsely use the name of the religion to propagate their own acts of violence.
I think we should redefine terrorism or extremism. It shouldn't be the preserve of Muslims who are fighting for Sharia, even though we may not share in their violent methodology in seeking that end. So before 9/11, global terrorism took a multi-religious face, but now it has come to be synonymous with Islamic fundamentalism.
Recently, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair tackled the issue head-on when he said, and I quote, "Now the threat of this radical Islam is not abating. It is growing. It is spreading across the world. It is destabilizing communities and even nations. Many solutions have been offered to tackle this issue. And the general public across many countries around the world are also concerned." Also, religious extremism. Let's now hear what the public has to say about this issue.
They do it, it's out of politics. Those who try to bring those kind of violence, they bring it in the Muslim community, but it has got nothing to do with Islam.
This thing is as a result of our upbringing or where we are coming from. It's not in connection to somebody's religion or something.
Islam itself means peace, and those who are in it have to explain to those who are not in the religion so that they will understand what the word Islam means.
The Holy Quran clearly states that you should not force any other person to be a Muslim. So it tells you in the Holy Quran that La ikraha fi din katabayyana min ar-rushd. There is no compulsion in Islam.
No religion supports people to kill. So I don't think the moment it gets extreme, then I believe the religion aspect of it is being overlooked.
So you heard it all. The issue may not be as simplistic as one would have us believe. So begin with a discussion in the studio and have with me Naib Amir, or let me say Deputy Amir of the Ahmadiyya Mission Ghana, Maulvi Mohammed bin Salim. Maulvi, you are welcome. Thank you. And also have with me Mr. Ike Jesu, is former headmaster of Ahmadiyya Secondary School, Kumasi, and a journalist. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Naib, let me begin with you. I'm sure you heard it all. And it's a major, extremism has been a major cause for worry. What could be responsible for the rise in religious extremism?
Well, to start with, I want to say that religious extremism and terrorism, as we've just heard, is one and the same thing. They are bedfellows, the same umbilical cord running through them. The modus operandi is the same one and the same thing. The objectives are the same. Murder, heckling, visiting untold hardships on innocent people, and so on and so forth. That is what, but as it is to, the definition becomes a bit difficult because one man's hero is said to be, rather one man's terrorist or religious extremist is said to be another person's hero or freedom fighter or liberator. Therefore, it becomes difficult to really give a definition to terror. But any act that is meant to bring about hardships on innocent people is extremism, whether it is for religious purposes or political purposes. Now, come to the root cause of religious extremism. Now, the root cause of religious extremism, I see them as three. First and foremost is bigotry. And the second one I can think of is intolerance. And the third one is superiority complex. Now, these three are linked. One produces the other. As a result of bigotry, you become intolerant. And as a result of intolerance, you start developing superiority complex in you. Now, bigotry in the sense of that mindset that I am the best. What I have is the best. The door is closed. No room for any other explanation. No other person's own can be compared to mine. Full stop. That brings about the spirit of intolerance. Since you start beginning to feel that you have the best and that is what it is, there isn't anything better than that, you become intolerant to any other views. You close all avenues for any other additional views coming from wherever those views can come from. And when you become intolerant, you finally develop superiority complex in you. Superiority complex in you, an obsession, a self-obsession that I'm the best, I'm better. And since you are better, all the other inferior ones, you are superior, the other inferior ones must cease to exist. Only you must exist. Since the inferior ones will not easily give in to non-existence, you have to confront them by using violence.
Right now, Naib, I can see you are really passionate about the issues, the bigotry, intolerance, and superiority complex. We definitely will come back up to that. Let's go to Mr. Ike Jesse. What role does religion actually play in acts of terror? Mr. Jesse.
Thank you. Let me say that when we talk of religious extremism, we are not talking of a 21st century phenomenon. We've had religious extremism ever since religion became part of human existence.
Right.
In one form, you find one religion, no matter how many groups are in that religion, seeing the other religions as inferior and calling the followers of those religions as unbelievers, infidels, heretics, and so on, and even witches. Then within one religion, you can have groups, with some groups arrogating to themselves the power to decide who is a true member of that religion. We've had that in Islam. Some people thinking, we are the true believers of Allah. All others are infidels, and not only are they infidels, if they are infidels, then they should be persecuted, they should be tried on false charges, they should even be killed in the name of religion. And it's unfortunate in the 21st century, when we think there is more enlightenment than the Middle Ages, we have religious extremism.
Right, we will expatiate further on that. Why in the 21st century, when there is light, there seems to be all sorts of violence associated with religious extremism. So, Farouk.
Got a few tweets here, Ibrahim. Thank you very much for your very interesting comments. And I think really is good to read those tweets at this juncture. Peace Bird is the username of this tweeter. They say the Christians and Muslims must try to live together to build the nations in Africa as it happens in the West. I think I should add on, if I'm allowed to, like Ghanaians do as well. Because they also, we see here a lot of harmony between Christians and Muslims. Indeed, I think you need to come to Ghana and see for yourself how it is like West when it comes to tolerance. The next one is, in fact, a message from Lee Wiseman. He is a Jewish by belief, but of course, as every religion has great people in that, he's a very fair person. He says that most of what the media reports as the abuses of Islam are, in fact, abuses against Islam. So clearly what he's saying is that whatever is being done in the name of Islam, in true sense, in fact, it's being done against Islam. So thank you very much, Mr. Wiseman, for your very wise comments. Then we've got Sam, who says it's an extreme minority of people who commit these acts of terror, and yet some feel it's appropriate to generalize an entire religion. Indeed, that's a problem we are noticing around the world. Then Maiden Nebulous, that's the username, they say terrorism has no religion, ethnicity, or language. Acts of terror are committed by people who have turned their back on morals and faith. So indeed, these people are faithless and have got no morals, whoever they are, wherever they're from. Now I understand we have one of our missionaries who's based in Ghana, from Kumasi in the Ashanti region. His name is Mr. Yusuf Adose. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Adose. Can you hear me at all?
Mr.
Yusuf Adose, you are with us online from Ashanti region. How are you doing, sir?
Doing fine. How are you?
Thank you very much. We're very well here. We would like to hear your views about something in particular. We use this expression, homegrown terrorism. What is it, and how big is the problem of this in Western world as well as in this part of the world?
For what we are talking about now, it's about extremism. If one sees not the other as to coexist with him, and he wants to dominate the person, then extremism coming. Here in Africa, we have traditional religion, and the religious people do not see eye with him, eye to eye with them. But that is also their religion. Sometimes they take their religion as fetishism. And this is one of the areas where they do not coexist. Otherwise, in Africa, there is not so much of religious extremism. These extremisms are of many dimensions. We have got the ethnic dimension. Or wherever we see disturbances, most of them are of the ethnic dimension. Sometimes it is also a political dimension. And sometimes it is also materialistic dimension. Materialistic dimension in the sense that someone is seeking to amass wealth that belongs to the whole nation. And others also want to resist. Then come in the extremism. This extremism persists in all people, not only in Africa, but in the people of the world. In Africa here, the people, like what happened in Rwanda, it was very much of an ethnic dimension. But when you go to other places like Liberia, Sierra Leone, it was of a materialistic dimension. The people, wherever there is disturbances, you can see that the natural resources, like a diamond, was in abundance, and the people were trying to get domination in order to amass the wealth of the nation.
Mr. Odusei, we'll stay with you throughout. Please don't hang up. We'll come back to you for more questions. I've got one tweet which I can read first. What am I allowed to do that? I'll read a tweet, and then, of course, Ibrahim, we go on with more questions, perhaps. This tweet is from somebody called Brian John Spencer, and it's a very sensible tweet, of course, as many tweeters do. It says, "I oppose Muslim extremism, but two wrongs don't make a right. Tackling extremism with extremism is wrong." And also a cartoon is pretty interesting where one person says, "Hate your neighbor." So probably this guy's neighbor is a nasty one. He says, "Let's hate back." And that is not the solution, is it? Ibrahim.
Well, thank you very much, Farouk. Obviously, two wrongs do not make a right. So that is the end of the first part. We move to the second part, that is Islamic extremism in Africa. In part two, we look at the rise of Islamic extremism within Africa. But before that, let's look at some papers. Farouk.
Yes, thank you very much. Also, would like to remind the viewers, please keep calling in. I repeat the number. I need to first of all find out the number where it is. The number should be, that you could be calling from Ghana, is as follows. 0302 770 111. 0302 770 111. If you're calling from outside Ghana, please call 0044 208 687 8010. Thank you. Now let's take a look at one of the stories on the Guardian newspaper. A story is heart-wrenching, of course. The whole world has been taken by surprise and shock. And that story is of the abduction of innocent young girls. And of course, if you are viewing this show, we're pretty sure you've already heard the story and your heart is equally broken and bleeding. The story, the caption is, it says, "Parents of kidnapped schoolgirls in Nigeria plead for mercy." It's because of those 234 girls who have been abducted. May Allah, these girls go back to their parents safe and sound. And then again, that story is followed by another story about the current situation in Nigeria. The government has now permitted for the peaceful demonstrations to take place, of course, trying to get these girls released. There's somebody called Jupe Koopman, who has written on the blog of Huffington Post and says, "If Nigeria falls to Islamic extremists, all of Africa will be at risk." That's his view, and I was to read it out for you. And then, for the time, again, Prospect Journal of International Affairs at UCSD, they say, "A new home for Islamic extremism, Africa." And similarly, other newspapers have also got similar stories indeed, which we can't include at this point in time. Now, I think it would be worthwhile looking at another part of the show. The head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, who resides in London, he has been warning the world for a number of years now of the perils and the dangers the world is facing right now. Extremism is one of those top ones. He's very concerned about that. He's been to the world's parliaments to talk about this. And last year, it was the end of November month in 2013, when he spoke to a number of Africans. And in that, and it was organised by Pan-African Association of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Great Britain. A number of ambassadors and people of note from African origin were present there. And he reminded the world of the problems, and Africa in particular, what dangers Africa faces, and he mentioned even Nigeria as well. Let's hear what he had to say to the world, and Nigeria in particular.
Look at Nigeria, whilst it has vast natural resources, in particular huge oil reserves, the country is not progressing and rather is going backwards. This is because internal politics and division have taken hold and because selfish elements are prioritizing their personal interests over the common good of the nation. Today, we must all recognize that the world has come to resemble a global village. Terrorist organizations and those groups that are causing disorder are no longer limited to some Asian countries, but have now entered Africa. It used to be thought that terrorists may not move towards Africa, but we now see in Nigeria and certain other countries that such groups are spreading their networks of hatred. They are causing damage to properties. They are conducting suicide bombings and various other attacks, all of which are against the national interest. Thus, all nations should remain vigilant because there is a risk of such extremist groups spreading their webs further afield to those nations which so far have been saved from their hateful influence. Otherwise, it is not unlikely that every country will come to suffer from terrorism and extremism. As is known from past experience, wherever extremists and terrorists have ingrained themselves, the result has been that the progress of the nation, that nation has completely stopped and the country's political and national power has disintegrated. And so, if all countries do not pay immediate attention to such threats, then they may well have to face similar consequences through which their strength will be weakened. Certainly, where a country's power erodes, it will lead to the major powers seeking to exploit those weaknesses and to try and once again enslave the vulnerable developing countries.
We heard a very short excerpt from Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, his speech, which he delivered in London last year. But ever since that time, of course, we've seen, almost as what he said, we've seen that things have become from bad to worse. Let's watch a short report now about extremism in Africa. So indeed, of course, we're seeing now at the moment is that the problem has become very pervasive, and Africa is a target at the moment. And this report has been prepared for you by the GBC's very hard-working staff and MTA staff who are here serving their brothers and sisters in this part of the world. Let's watch a short report about extremism rising in Africa. The madness of extremism took a new scale when on 11 September 2001, Twin Towers in New York were attacked by Al-Qaeda. The menace of extremism has spread all over the world now. Africa is no more safe either. From east to west, we've seen a number of atrocities against humanity and common sense. What's happened is, in Kenya, for example, the recent events have taken the world by storm. Similarly, Nigeria is also seeing similar kind of attacks, which have really affected every decent household emotionally and psychologically.
If you lose sight of the fact that there's a need to respect other people's freedoms and rights, then you move into that realm of extremism.
As a democratic country, everybody should be free to do whatever you want to do as far as the religion is concerned.
People are trying to, like, they are not practicing what their religion is teaching. They are doing what is beyond their religion. For instance, let's take Boko Haram like this. But what I do is not Islamic way, because if you look at the point that they have been killing the Muslims, not only the Christians, they have been killing the Muslims. So I think what they're doing is not about Islam per se. What they're doing, they are doing their own thing. They are doing what will benefit them. That's why they're doing that.
Talking about Nigeria, which is very badly affected by extremism at the moment. North of Nigeria is filled with Muslims. The south is more affluent and is Christian dominated. Now, this problem is around the world, and also Africa is a current target. But the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, has spoken at length at various world parliaments and various forums, reminding the world to fulfill the rights of the Creator and the creation.
I will, God willing, always continue to carry out my task and my responsibilities of promoting peace, tolerance, justice, and compassion to the corners of the world. I will continue to tell all people that in order to be relieved of the pain and suffering that we face today, we must adopt true justice and equality.
But within the same Africa is a country called Ghana on the western part of it. We are in Accra, the capital city of Ghana. This country is filled with interfaith harmony and people love each other. True spirit of brotherhood could be seen on the streets, at homes, in families, everywhere. And the government has a massive role to play.
Ghana is enjoying this peace that is like due to democracy. We also understand each other and we like each other. So whatever the case may be, we will not like to fight.
Ghana is enjoying more peace because of the way our leaders in the past and now have handled religion. Because we have not pinned the country to a single religion. We see ourselves as cosmopolitan, multi-religious society, ranging from traditional beliefs through to Islamic, Christianity. All manner of religions are respected.
In terms of religion, it is like we all find ourselves in one house. That is where we all come from. And if it is about you and me, based on the same beliefs, that doesn't make the two of us enemies.
So still on the issue, we show you a playback of an earlier interview I had with Dr. Adam Higazi, who is a lecturer in African politics and history at the Center of African Studies at the University of Cambridge. Who is a lecturer in African politics and history at the Center of African Studies, University of Cambridge. Adam, we would want to ask you a few questions on the current situation of religious extremism within West Africa. But let's start off with a little background to the situation. Historically, how have Christian-Muslim relations been within West Africa?
If you take it very roughly in terms of the Atlantic world and the sort of Saharan, Sahelian worlds, on the coastal areas, Christianity has tended to, that was the original point from which Christianity spread into other parts of the region, whereas Islam tended to come from the north across the Sahara. Islam arriving earlier into West Africa across the Saharan trading networks, Christianity being brought through missionary activity, starting with Portuguese and then later British, French and so on. But I would say that there's maybe always been some element of competition, but there's also been good relations across many communities that are religiously mixed in West Africa. So religion hasn't always been an issue that's brought conflict. But I think it's probably fair to say that the level of religious conflicts has increased over the past few decades.
Right, Adam, let's narrow it to Nigeria so that we can have we can put it in a proper perspective. Nigeria and other countries have seen a rise in religious extremism over the past few decades. When did the Islamic extremist threat enter West Africa?
Well, first of all, we need to define our terminology. I mean, what do you mean by Islamic extremism? Most Muslims, I would contend, even today in northern Nigeria, are not extremists. So, I mean, there are different issues at stake. One is the kind of dissatisfaction that extends across Nigeria and indeed in other parts of West Africa with the government and the level of corruption and the sort of persistent high levels of poverty and so on. And sometimes that's challenged through religion. But at the same time, I would say from about the late 1970s, there's been growing influence of Salafist or Wahhabi trends from the Middle East and places like Sudan. A kind of, preachers and Islamic leaders going to places like Saudi Arabia and Khartoum for their education and coming back with ideas that are perhaps new to West Africa. So such movements, these are Islamic reformist movements, became much stronger from about the late 1970s.
Right, Adam, some commentators are saying that Africa is the next battleground against religious extremism. How serious is the current danger of religious extremism in Nigeria? And do you think it will spread to other countries in the region?
I think the current insurgency in Nigeria is very serious. It's the most deadly insurgency in the world at the moment in a country that's not in civil war. Now, because of this situation, with the violence getting worse in northeast Nigeria, there is, of course, a danger that it could spread to other countries in the region, because Borno State borders Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. And so those countries, I think, are also concerned about what's happening, and there have been some cross-border incidents. But whether this could lead to a sort of wider destabilization, I'm not so sure, because so far it's been more contained within the border areas, and I think neighbouring countries are being quite careful to make sure that it doesn't extend further. It's premature to say that that's going to spread more widely.
Right, we want to thank you very much for your time with us. So that was an earlier interview with a lecturer in African politics and history at the Center of African Studies, University of Cambridge. So let's continue with the discussion. Talk of extremism, and the red flag is usually raised in the court of Islam. But let me ask you now, does Islam really teach us to be extremists? And if not, why is Islam usually associated with it?
Well, extremism or religious extremism, or for that matter, Muslim extremism, does not find any place in the dictionary of Islam. That is to tell you that there isn't any such system in Islam. But extremism, yes, these days come to be associated with Islam just as it was associated with other groups some time ago. If you come to think of the 11th century Crusaders, it is the same system that's still going on now. Now, the 2nd century Crusaders carried out killing thousands of people in the name of religion, wearing the cloak of religion, Christianity. But Christianity, it's a peaceful religion. It's the same thing that's going on now about Islam. Islam is a peaceful religion. Islam has no place for such like activities. Yet, pretenders are within the Muslim group using the name of Islam, parading themselves as Muslim. Yes, probably some of them may have good intentions to start with, which I cannot tell. They may have reasons convincing to themselves why they should do that. But by the end of it, because of the mode of achieving their aim, they become extremists in the sense that they visit unnecessary, untold hardships on very innocent people. That is forbidden in Islam. But here is the case, they use the name of Islam. And just as it was in the past, that these things have a remote cause. What is that remote cause? That remote cause itself is fascism. That has also found its way into Islam, just as it found its way into religions or other people in the past, like I mentioned, the Crusaders. Now, what is fascism? Fascism is the teaching or the theory of survival of the fittest. That life is a matter of chance. Since it is a matter of chance, you can only survive if you have the might. And if you have the might, you survive. And having the might to survive means that you must eliminate and eliminate some people. And when it comes to eliminating some people because you have the might, it boils down to materialism. That is why I say that it is fascist, but has no religious bit whatsoever. But religion is seen to be something people are emotionally attached to, and religion somehow is vulnerable when you come to think of it that way. So they feel it is the best tool to use to achieve their aim.
And that is interesting, but let's go to Mr. I.K. Jesse. I'm listening to Naib Amir Mulvey Mohammed bin Salih. He has alluded to the 11th century Crusaders, fascism, and so on and so forth. Now, let me ask a related one. With this background, why is Islam still associated with extremism? Because the Holy Quran comprehensively speaks against all forms of extremism.
There is the genuine belief, I think, among those who use Islam as a tool, that indeed there is an assault on Islam by the West. To explain is not just to justify, but let me give you an example. In the statute books of the West is the law which says that anyone who says the Jewish Holocaust never happened can be tried and jailed. And Professor David Irving, a British professor, was jailed in Austria for 3 years. Now, when somebody caricatures the Prophet of Islam, the West says, oh, it's freedom of expression. So there's that genuine fear.
So you reckon there's a problem on both sides, actually? I think some extremists doing extremist acts, and again, like the neighbor, if neighbor hates, you don't hate back. So the reality is, in fact, the Western governments also have some role to play in this.
Yes.
But we're discussing here the role of extremists here, who actually are using the name of Islam, the religion. Islam doesn't have those teachings at all.
No, Islam doesn't, but I'm trying to, that's why I said to explain is not to justify. I'm not saying that extremism in any form or wherever the source is can be justified. But I'm explaining why. If a person is hungry and he steals food, the explanation that he was hungry, it doesn't mean that he's going to steal somebody's food. Now, just one more example. 21st December 1988, there was this horrific bombing of the Lockerbie, over Lockerbie. The Pan-American plane was bombed. So almost 300 people died. There was a lot of hue and cry. But what some people forget is that before that, in July 3, 1988, an American warship had bombed an Iranian plane, a civilian plane, an Airbus 300, with all the markings showing that it was civilian. The Americans said they thought it was a military plane. The plane had just taken off and climbing. They said they thought it was descending. They said they sent in a message, but through a military channel, not through a civilian channel. If they did, the pilots would not know. So I'm saying,
yes, I mean, that's fine, we understand that, but we're trying to find out here about Islamic teachings.
Islam doesn't encourage that.
Thank you very much. Naomi, you please tell us, what is in crux, in 1 minute, Islamic teaching about extremism? Does Islam teach extremism?
Islam does not teach extremism, and Islam hasn't got anything to do with extremism. Islam is a religion of peace, and Islam encourages coexistence, love of one another, humanity to come to play in the lives of the people. And brotherliness for that matter. That is what Islam stands for. Islam does not make room. It does not give room for anybody to use, go into violence.
Sure.
It can never, as far as Islam is concerned, be justified.
How would you compare the actions of some Muslims today with 14 centuries back, the time of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Please expound on that.
The attitude of some of the Muslims today, of course, is just about the same attitude of the infidels, I can say, at the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. That is why it is said that infidelity is infidelity wherever it is. Because they acted out of ignorance, some of them. Some of them acted out of envy. And like I mentioned earlier, some acted out of intolerance. That is what they did. But at the end of the day, when Islam became victorious, some of them had to reverse their notes, to refer to their notes and then revise their stand. Because they came to find that at the end of the day, what wins the hearts of man is love and affection. What wins the heart of a man, it's education, explaining for the person to come to understand what the viewpoint is. That is what can let you win them. Because they juxtapose it against the amount of mayhem they have visited upon the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his companions. And yet, they were not able to defeat the Holy Prophet Muhammad. They were not able to dampen their morale. The more they persecuted them, the more determined they were to offer the best possible love and affection to win them over.
Right, I know you are really passionate to expatiate on the issue, but we definitely would come back to you. We are told we have a caller on the line. Nana from Kumasi. Nana, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right, so we are listening to you. Let's hear your view on the subject.
Good, thank you very much. You know, the issue about religious extremism in the world has to do with divisions, different religious ideologies. And that is what is dividing the world. Now, my problem actually is that the book we call Bible today and the book we call Quran has the same teachings that can actually stabilize the world and then bring peace. Because if you look at the completion of the Bible, which the last prophet on the earth, John, in Christian perspective, the Revelation, the book of Revelation was actually written by John, and it was completed in the 1st century. Now, coming to the Quran, when the Prophet Muhammad came in AD 571, it was clearly that the Bible has already been completed. The reading of the Bible has been completed. And so if you take the Torah, or what we call the Torah, if you take the Zabura, if you take the Injil, you know, Muslims believe in these books that they hear from God. Whereas this book talks about good things that will come.
Sorry, Nana, sorry to stop you there. Nana, do you have a question?
No, let me make a snappy point.
Nana, thank you for your point. Nana, we are very short of time here. Do you have a question, please, for us?
Okay, I'll be snappy, please. I'll be snappy.
Thank you.
Good. So if the Quran and the Bible are talking about the same thing, why do some Muslims, I'm not saying all the Muslims, because some Muslims, they read the Bible, they understand. Some Muslims say the Bible is outdated. Where did they get the information in the Quran today to fix it? It's actually from the Bible. So why is the condemnation of the Bible? Because the Quran, the man we call the Prophet Muhammad actually started in 85.
Right, Nana, we'd want to thank you very much for talking to us. A point well made. So let's continue with the discussion. I wanted to ask you a question before Nana came in. We are talking about the fact that the Quran condemns in strongest terms any forms of extremist ideas and so on and so forth. Now, when you see adherents of the faith quoting with passion to support their perpetration of violence, is it a matter of them not understanding the teachings of the Quran? Or some of you have not done enough to explain the very core message of Islam, which is on peace and submission to the will of Allah?
It is certainly true that it's out of ignorance that some of them do the things they do using the Quran as a sport base. And you may be right if you say some of us haven't educated them sufficiently enough. And when you say some of them, you're talking of myself and people like me, those who claim to be learned ones among Muslims. But don't forget that some of these learned ones are driven by ego. And because of that, because there isn't any form of checks and balances among us, we ourselves, in some cases, lead ourselves astray. And unless and until we are ourselves enlightened, unless and until we ourselves know the true meaning of the Holy Quran, whatever we will want to say or teach to others will itself be misleading as well. That is the real issue that is confronting. You see, and the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is reported to have said that a time will come upon Muslims when the learned ones among the Muslims will be the worst sort of creation, and they will be the source of discord. They will be the cause of disturbances. They will be the cause of all upheavals taking place in the world. But unfortunately for them, the evil effect of their own leadership, which will lead to chaos, that evil effect of it will be visited upon they themselves in their own lifetime. That is the situation that we find among Muslims today. Wrong interpretation of the Holy Quran, wrong practical demonstration of the Holy Quran, using Quranic verses and interpreting them in meanings that don't exist, that was never done. For instance, if you talk of the Holy Quran is the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his Sunnah. And the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we can take his lifestyle. He has lived among Christians. He has lived among Jews. What is it that happened? What happened was that even the Jews, the Christians, and whoever other people who were there, they were the people who unanimously, seeing the lifestyle of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, requested him to be their leader.
Sorry, now a question for you. Now you say, of course, it's difficult now because people understand Islamic teachings and, of course, they're portraying their own version. Is there any way now for us to find out what is a true Islamic teaching? Do we have a guidance there available?
Yes, we have guidance available in knowing the true teachings of Islam, because we have been told that this is going to happen. A time will come when the Holy Quran will suffer this, that it will be there as a book, beautiful, but it will be devoid of the blessing.
And do we have a leadership with us that could guide us right path?
That is the point, the reason why the proper definition or interpretation of Islam we can have it is that at a point there was going to be leadership among Muslims, following on the precepts of prophethood. And it is when this leadership is established that you would have uniformity in the system of Islam, you would have the true interpretation of the Holy Quran. The Holy Prophet Muhammad tells us that it is at the time of this established leadership, Khilafat, which would have following on the footsteps of prophethood. That is the prophethood of the Messiah, known in Islam as the Imam Mahdi, after which Khilafat, which used to exist at the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, just as it used to exist at the time of all the previous prophets, Hazrat Musa and co, will be established once more. And once it is established...
Right now, we definitely will come back to you.
Great.
We are told we have a caller on the line. Your name and where you are calling from?
Hello, my name is Eric.
And where are you calling from?
New Wager.
Right, Eric, let's hear you.
Yes, I thank the panelists for, what is and I think they too, it also helps me that the Islamic leaders of Ghana have come out with the and all other attacks from Islam. My question is, can we have the world Islam also coming out to say that it never supports attacks on people?
Eric, I couldn't hear that one. If you could kindly repeat it for our guest to give you an answer.
What I'm saying is, can we have the world Islam? The world Islam?
Could you? I'm sorry about that, but could you kindly reposition yourself? We are having a feedback, so we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
It's better now.
Okay. The question I'm asking is, can we have the world Islam body, or let's say a Muslim body in the world? Understand? That will make a definite statement, so that whenever we have any group like the Al Qaeda, the Al Shabaab, or the Boko Haram, we can all speak the fact that these people are not doing it in the name of Islam any part of the world, and everybody will be well.
Right. Point well made, my brother. Thank you very much for your contribution.
You see, what the gentleman is asking for is something which he cannot get immediately, because when we talk of extremism within Islam, don't think that it is meted out to only non-Muslims. There are cases of Muslim against Muslim. One sect one Muslim sect against the other Muslim sect. Now, how is the leader of these two, leader of one of them, how can he appeal to the followers of the other person? How will he be able to stand as a mouthpiece for all those other warring factions? That is not possible. It is only possible when we have a united front, and you can never have a united front without leadership. That is why the Holy Prophet Muhammad says that a time will come when the Imam Mahdi will come. That is a direct reference to the second coming of Jesus Christ, and that when he comes, every Muslim, anybody who calls himself a Muslim, need to find his way to him. If even he has to crawl on ice, get to him, extend Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh from he, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and make bayat in his hand.
Right.
It is only there and then that unity could have been established in Islam.
Right.
Islam can boast of leadership, and on the basis of leadership, Islam, in one piece, in one mouth, can make statements.
Right, Movi, thank you very much. Mr. I.K. Jesse, Movi has said a lot of wonderful things. I'm sure that will be news to many people watching us now. You are a columnist, a journalist. Is it that we haven't done enough to educate people to know the true teachings of Islam?
I think some of us are doing the little we can, but outside our individual selves. We said there is an organization. A brother will come and talk more about it. I've just mentioned it in passing, that there is a Muslim organization, the Ahmadi community, Ahmadiyya community, that is doing its best through the worldwide leader to tell other people that violence should not be associated with Islam, because Islam abhors violence. But then you cannot in a second, you cannot even in a century turn everybody into a Muslim or take that person away from his misconceived beliefs about his religion. It is something which is going to take time. Islam is 1,400 years old. Not everybody is a Muslim. But the effort must be made. Unfortunately, the head of the Ahmadiyya, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, is making that. I don't want to go into there because, as I said, a brother will come. But let me make this point, that Islam is never, has never, and will never be in favor on the side of violence. People want to use Islam for, as he said, for personal ends, for political ends. And so is, I said in secondary school, the easiest thing for those who hatch plots, demonstration plots, is to say the food is not good. You were once a student. It is easy to use food.
No, I never took part in a demonstration.
Those who are doing so may not even be concerned about the food at all.
Thank you, Mr. JC. Thank you very much indeed. Of course, to move on now, because the most important part of the show is finding solutions as to how to find the problems. Very quickly looking at what Boko Haram stands for. Of course, looking at some stories and we'll ask a question based on what the story says. It is on the BBC Africa section. It says that Boko Haram stands for Boko, two words, Boko and Haram. Western education is forbidden, haram. And also they quote a Quranic verse, which is mentioned in the BBC, one of the articles, says that they quote the verse, anyone who is not governed by what Allah has revealed is among the transgressors. That is the ethos, that's the belief they stand by. The next one is, of course, we'll ask a question based on that in a couple of minutes. And then also another kind of extremism we're seeing in your Africa as well again, which is when Sudan, the court has given a woman death sentence on apostasy, that she's left Islam, and she gave birth to a baby girl with her legs shackled. That's the news on Independent. Extremely abhorrent stories from all around the world about Islam. So before we go on, let's quickly find out, does Islam teach for people to kill when somebody has left Islam?
Islam does not teach that people should be killed for leaving Islam. The Holy Quran says, those among you who believe and then disbelieve and then believe and then disbelieve. What does it tell you?
Somebody leaving, coming back over and over again.
Yes, what does it tell you? It tells you that if one disbelieves today, that does not necessarily give anybody the right to kill him, to take his life. No, but the Holy Quran does not give that right to anybody. So you can't take anybody's life because you feel he disbelieves. You see, you cannot defend God. If you pretend to think you are powerful enough to stand in for God, you are yourself committing an act of disbelief because you are associating a partner to God. That is you, your person. Allah Ta'ala is omnipotent enough to take care of himself, not you. You must be interested in your own soul, how to take care of your own soul, how to reflect, how to radiate that humility in you that can attract other people to join you in your belief system. That is what is expected of you, not to stand in the way of people with violence or swords and tell you take it or your head off. That is not Islam. It has no room whatsoever in Islam.
Right.
You see?
Let me ask you, I'm sorry about that, but let me ask you a quick one before I forget, because as you speak, I'm also lost in a way. Yes. Is it that some of these verses that you just mentioned are so hidden in the Quran that people who perpetrate some of these acts of brutality do not see it?
You see, for instance, the verse which he quoted from the Holy Quran, if you can quote it again for the listening public,
yes,
you can read it out again.
Of course, we can say that. It says that they say anyone who is not governed by what Allah has revealed is among the transgressors.
Yes.
Out of context altogether.
Good. Now, those who do not act according to what Allah Ta'ala has revealed, they are the transgressors. Transgressing against what? The transgression is against what? Your own soul. For instance, the Holy Quran teaches us the way we should eat, the kind of food we should eat, because food plays a very important role on not only our physical selves, but our spiritual selves. Food has that effect. The Holy Quran therefore teaches us how to go about it, to balance it in such a way that physically you benefit from it, spiritually too you benefit from it. If you go against that, you're wronging your own soul. That, for instance, is what the verse is telling us. You see, people think when the Holy Quran talks of the rules and regulations that govern nature are what we find in the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran's interest is not in only the spiritual being, but the physical and moral being of the man. That's all what Islam is interested in. So, to go against you, it will go against your own soul if hygienically
just a question thank you. Mr. Chasey, a question for you then about the Boko Haram concept. Western education is not allowed in Islam. What does that mean?
When they say so,
what is Western education?
They are taking away the credit. We should go to Islam. Is it Western education to study algebra?
Right.
A subject whose name comes from an Arabic word joining together? Is it Western education when people study astronomy? Who were the best in astronomy? They give the credit to Ptolemy, Galileo, but before that, there were Muslims who had studied astronomy because they needed it, among other things, for prayers and for navigation. So I do not understand what Boko Haram means, Western education. And in any case, I'm sure they use guns, they use uniform sewn words, sewing machines manufactured in the West. And they are now using these modern gadgets, I understand. This is what gives Islam a very bad name, unfortunately, because people are going to come to an opinion by using the worst possible example. The Quranic thing you were quoted. You should go up and see how Allah is telling the Jews that He gave them the Torah, so they should judge according to the Torah. How the Christians were given the gospel, and therefore so you go according to the laws given you by God.
Right, sorry, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Ekejese. That was interesting, but we are told we have a caller on the line. Dr. Anas Issa Duse. Dr. Duse, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I hope you are doing well.
But I'll agree.
Right, so can we hear you, Dr. Anas Duse?
Yeah, thank you. As the discussion goes on, I'm just wondering through my mind if all of us Muslims have not, unfortunately, tacitly agreed with, a nefarious agenda by the West. Why do we accept that there is anything in this world called Islamic extremism? From what the panelists have said, if you stretch Islam to the limits, you won't find any kind of extremism that can justifiably be pre-modified with Islamic. So if none of the extremist activities that people perpetrate are Islamic, then one, I think that we then, the learned ones among Muslims should engage in an academic and peaceful protest against this naming, because after all, among all religions, the Christians fight, the Muslims fight, and some Muslims also fight. Why is it that any kind of war, be it political, ethnic, or whatever, that involves Muslims are tagged as Islamic extremist activities? I'm just wondering. Right,
we want to thank you very much, Dr. Anas Duse, who believes that there should be an academic protest. That is interesting. So that is how we end part 2. We go for
can I say one
a quick
academic
break before that.
That's going on anyway, academic reaction. Yes. We are talking about that. We'll talk in the last section after the break, shall we? Right.
So we go for a quick break, and then when we return, we begin with the third and final part.
La for, hit for none. All the time, la for, hit for none. Hit for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for, hit for none. Hit for none. All the time, la for, hit for none. Hit for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for, hate for none. All the time, la for, hate for none. Hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for, hate for none. Hate for none. All the time, la for, hate for none. Hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. Love your neighbor all the time. Even enemies, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor, even enemies, for Islam stand for peace. La for, hate for none. Hate for none. All the time. La for, hate for none. Hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. Love your neighbor all the time. Even enemies, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor, even enemies, for Islam stand for peace. La for, hate for none. Hate for none. All the time. La for, hate for none. Hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for, hate for none. All the time. La for, hate for none. Hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for, hatred for none. All the time. La for, hatred for none. Hatred for none. For Islam stand for peace. As a Muslim, mind your language all the time. No matter what you do, what you say, let's remember Islam stands for peace. La for, hatred for none. All the time. La for, hatred for none. For Islam stands for peace. As a Muslim, mind your language all the time. No matter what you do, what you say, let's remember Islam stands for peace. La for, hatred for none. All the time. La for, hatred for none. For Islam stands for peace.
You're welcome back, and the last part of the music that I heard vividly is Islam stands for peace. So we begin with the third and final part of the program, the Ahmadiyya community speaking out against religious extremism and uniting religions under one banner. So looking at the Muslim community itself, we see that there seems to be no leadership or common voice within to condemn extremism or show a practical example of what Islam stands for today. The Ahmadiyya community, through the leadership and direction of the head of the community, has been a role model for Islam across the world. Let's hear how this community has not only made efforts to speak out against extremism, but has worked towards fostering harmony among religions. But before we begin, let me introduce Abubakar A.B. Yakubu, who is current headmaster of Tia Ahmadiyya Secondary School, Kumasi. Mr. A.B. Abubakar, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Right. So, Farouk, you have some stories for us.
Thank you very much indeed, Ibrahim. First of all, I think the two questions have been asked by Eric as well as Anas are both very linked questions, of course. He says, Eric said that why can't the whole world follow the Ahmadiyya way of living? And Anas says that why can't we engage in academic debate? That's exactly what the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, who resides in London and heads up more than 160 million Ahmadis worldwide, and that's exactly what he's doing at the moment. So let's take a look at one of the stories about historic reception that took place at Houses of Parliament in London, where Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad visited the parliamentarians, who was invited by the Deputy Prime Minister and other members of the Parliament. A few pictures to be seen on the screen, perhaps. Here he's coming through the big hall of Westminster, where he's been escorted. He's with Ed Davey, who's the MP and Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change. Going further down, he's sitting there with the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, and again more MPs there. This is Theresa May, who is the Home Secretary there in the UK, as well as this is again Ed Davey, who's Energy and Climate Change State Secretary, as well as lastly here, Shadow Foreign Secretary Douglas Alexander is listening to Hazur. Now, again, at the same time, Government of UK also has a website, and over there we've got the extreme, there's a in the Home Office section, Theresa May's section, she has, of course, given this breaking story at that time when Hazur visited last year in summer, that the Home Secretary has praised the work of Ahmadiyya Muslim community in fighting extremism across the UK. Now, this is a picture, and one thing I would like to quote from Hazur's speech over there at the Parliament. Hazur said that if a person's heart desires, then they are free to accept Islam. But if their heart does not, then they are free to reject it. Therefore, Islam is completely against compulsion and extremism. It advocates peace and harmony at all levels of society. I think whatever we've been saying here is summed up in this one paragraph so beautifully. In the meantime, also received a few tweets. Luqman Ahmed says that do not let your differences prevent development and progress of your country. Hazur Eid bin Asad Aziz says at the African reception. So Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad was present last year with the Africans in the month of November and said that don't prevent development of your countries by falling prey to extremism. And also, Abu Bakr is another gentleman from Africa. He says, I am in Chibok, which is a place where the girls are abducted. And he says that what is happening is not in Islamic teaching at all. We miss our people in the area. So that's clearly what Islamic teachings are. And of course, we can do further about what Ahmadiyya community is doing in a few moments. Ibrahim.
Yeah, thank you very much, Farouk. Now, let me begin with you. Maulvi Mohammed bin Saleh, you are Deputy Amir of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Mission Ghana. How is the Ahmadiyya community speaking out against extremism?
Ahmadiyya speaks out against extremism not only in Ghana, not only in Germany, but throughout the whole world in various forms. For instance, you just heard the young man singing here. They're saying that love for all, hatred for none. That is the slogan of Ahmadiyya throughout the world. If you happen to find anybody driving a car with a sticker on it inscribed love for all, hatred for none, just rest assured that that fellow is an Ahmadi. This is to tell the whole world, to bring the whole world together, to let them understand that the only thing that can keep us together to work for progress is peace, not violence. One. Now, in Ghana, if you come to think of Ahmadiyyat, through Maulvi Abdul Wahab bin Adam, our Amir and missionary in charge, was the one who started an umbrella grouping of religious leaders in this country to come together from time to time to sit down and discuss common things for the purposes of ensuring understanding of one another, for the purposes of establishing peace. Then we started also here in this country a kind of a conference called the Religious Founders Day, in which we invite the leaders of all the known religious groups in this country to come, and we invite the general public, of course including Ahmadi Muslims, for every leader to tell the life story of their leader, their religion, the teachings, what their religion stands for. Now, this was meant to bring about understanding of one another. You can only understand me well if you get to know who I am, why I behave in a certain way. I'll, for instance, give you a story. A gentleman came down from Britain with a British friend who was visiting Africa for the first time. Now, when they came to Accra, the capital city of Ghana, where we sit now, they lived in a community that is predominantly a Muslim community. Now, very early in the morning, the British gentleman woke up his Ghanaian friend to tell him that, oh, look, there is somebody out there, he needs help. He must be going crazy, so he needs help. What is it about? It's just that he found that somebody got up at dawn and he was calling the azan and with a loud voice. So he felt that anybody who got up to be doing that at a certain time must have a problem, mental problem. Why is it so? Because he does not associate with Muslims. He knows very little or next to nothing about the Muslim community. But if he associated, he would have understood why they don't mean any harm. It's only calling people to prayer. Now, that is one step the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has taken to bring about togetherness, getting to know each other very well for purposes of promoting peace. That is at a local level here. If you go to our secondary schools, for instance, you will find different people of different backgrounds living there, diversity.
Right. Naiba, I will come back to you, but let me come to A.B. Abubakar. You are current headmaster of T. Ahmadiyya Secondary School. I wanted to reserve that question for you. That's why I had to interrupt Naib. We are aware that it's Christian-dominated, though it's a Muslim school. Do you impose Islamic teachings on the students?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. You rightly said the school is a public school, though established by the Ahmadiyya Muslim Mission in Ghana. As a public school, therefore, we do not discriminate at all as far as admissions into the school is concerned. Equally so, students who are in the school are treated as Ghanaian children, and they learn common things which will prepare them better for their future lives. And so there is no discrimination whatsoever as far as what their thought is concerned, how they are handled in the school is concerned. To the extent that, as was referred to by the earlier speaker, Mr. IKJC, who was a former headmaster, the school is proud that in its life it has been able to produce 2 moderators, that is 2 leaders of the Presbyterian Church in Ghana. That shows the level at which we try to allow equality to play as far as handling and treatment of students in the school is concerned. Thank you very much.
Right, very much. Thank you. Yes, now we have, I understand, online with us Associate Professor John Hanson from University of Indiana in the US. Are you online with us, sir?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us. I think probably it's early morning in America, is it?
Yes,
okay.
Not too early.
Good morning to you then, in that case. My first question is about, we know you've done a lot of research about the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and its beliefs. Looking at extremism as a topic, how do you find the concept of jihad understood by the Ahmadiyya community being different to the other people you see out there who are being, who are tarnishing the name of Islam?
That's a good question. Thank you for asking it. Muslim extremists define their military activities as jihad. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please carry on.
Muslim extremists define their activities as jihad, a word that means effort in Arabic. But this word conveys many meanings to Muslims throughout the world. Most Muslims condemn the extremist violent activities, but it's the Ahmadiyya Muslim community alone that goes further, not only repudiating the violence, but rejecting their definition of jihad. Let me explain a bit. Jihad and the related words appear in the Quran, and they refer to various meanings, nonviolent activities on the part of the Prophet Muhammad. When he went from Mecca to Medina, he engaged in defensive warfare against those opponents who were attacking him. After those wars, he repeatedly said that he was returning from the lesser jihad, which was military activity, to the greater jihad, which was internal spiritual effort. Now, the extremists don't accept that tradition, and they emphasize one verse, which they call the sword verse, that refers to, they think, to ongoing military activity. The vast majority of Muslims, however, do not accept this sword verse as being anything but something very specific at that time. And classically trained Islamic scholars produced a theology of just warfare between established states. They argued that now, at the time of international activity, and so therefore jihad is irrelevant, and so therefore they put this concept of jihad away. Now, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, Ghulam Ahmad, said the Quran needed to be interpreted as a complete revelation, and he emphasized those early activities of the Prophet Muhammad. He argued that defensive warfare that happened at the end of his life was only relevant during that particular period, and that the other verses that were the majority that endorsed nonviolent efforts were the enduring scriptural recommendation. In other words, peaceful religious efforts were what God commanded Muslims to perform.
Mr. Hanson, if I can stop you there.
Yes?
Mr. Hanson, you are a history professor, of course, but why in particular you have shown keen interest in the Ahmadiyya Muslim community? You've also been in Ghana, I understand. What in particular about Ahmadiyya Muslim community that draws your attention towards them?
Well, I believe that the Ahmadiyya movement is a neglected movement. Oftentimes it's considered a very minor sect by scholars of Islam. Obviously, Ahmadi Muslims don't believe that. But in Ghana, they have been very important historically in the last 100 years, propagating a message of peace and love, emphasizing religious schools, hospitals and medical care, and a range of activities that were open to all Ghanaians. I found that fascinating. I wanted to know the origins of that and the history of that. So that's what moved me to work on the history of the Ahmadiyya in Ghana.
Thank you. So the last question, perhaps, is going to be that, so of course, you've been to Ghana and you are researching the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. You're also writing a book, I understand. What are those things that could be learned from the Ahmadiyya community and the Ghanaian society together by the whole world, do you think?
Well, I think the Ghanaian community has tried to turn the other cheek when offensive remarks have been said to them. They try to promote peace and harmony. They try to bring various religious groups together. I think Ghana in general in West Africa has been associated with that, and so members of other religious communities also endorse that kind of perspective, so therefore they can work together and promote harmony in society.
Thank you very much indeed, and we wish you a very good weekend, and would like to see you when you visit again Ghana, and if we are here as well at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on your program.
Mr. Ibi Yakub, I'm sure you heard the Professor John Hanson from the University of Indiana. Still on the subject, so how do we promote peace, at least send the message of Islam at the pivot of the teachings of the religion?
Thank you very much. I would like to contribute in this regard by, first of all, stating emphatically that Islam indeed does not recognize and accept extremism in any form, to the extent that the Holy Quran tells us in Surah Hamim Sajda, that is chapter 41, verse 35 of the Holy Quran, that وَلَا تَسْتَوِي الْحَسَنَةٌ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةٌ ادْفَعْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. That is, and good and evil are not alike. Repel evil with that which is good, and lo, he between whom and thyself was enmity will become as though he were a warm friend. By this teaching, therefore, Islam is categorically telling us that, yes, in a given society, there could be misunderstanding here and there. But the best approach to go about it is that try to find a solution that will bring about peace at the end of the day. And you will all agree with me that the modus operandi of the extremists do not bring about peace. It always brings about chaos, misunderstanding, hatred, and what have you. So it is therefore not an aspect of Islam at all. It is only unfortunate that of modern days, almost all those who are going about these acts have Islam attached to their names, and people use it and then, as it were, attach to Islam. What we therefore need to do as Muslims is to also come out, like the Ahmadiyya Jamaat is doing, to propagate the religion very well. Anytime such a thing comes out, we come out with a lot of petitions, writing to condemn what has been done and to educate the public that this is the right approach we must go in finding solution to some of these problems, and that they shouldn't be misled by the name of these people who are tied to Islam to think that Islam accepts and encourages it. No. By so doing, we will get a lot of people to understand that in this act should be disassociated with Islam, and Islam should be seen as a religion that is peaceful, and people who are practicing it are supposed to bring about peace with the people they live with.
Right, thank you very much. Farouk?
Thank you very much. I think there's not much to do at this stage because time is also running out. I think at the end, from my end, of course, and from the end of Amnesty International from London, we have really come here and we realised, of course, you mentioned Islam is about coexistence, as well as the Ghanaian society is about coexistence. And this has been proven through this joint collaboration we've had. A number of Christian friends we made here at the Ghanaian Broadcasting Corporation, a lot of Muslim friends, and we all like brothers and sisters here. And I think this is exactly what Islamic teachings are, all about peace, love and harmony. If you save one person's life, in a way you save the entire mankind. That's what the Holy Prophet Muhammad says.
Right, thank you very much, Farouk. So that's how we draw the curtains on this special edition of Press Point. I call it the African one. We've been talking to the Naib Amir, or the Deputy Amir of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Mission Ghana, Maulvi Mohammed bin Salih. Maulvi, we thank you and we really appreciate your time with us. And we've also been talking to current headmaster of Tia Ahmadiyya Secondary School, Abubakar A.B. Yakub, and of course, Mr. I.K. Jesse, who is a former headmaster of Tia Ahmadiyya Secondary School, Kumasi, and a journalist. So you heard it all. Islam stands for peace. There is no compulsion in religion. And the Holy Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is reported to have said, if knowledge is in China, far away China, go seek it. So till we meet on this platform, same time, another time, may the peace and blessings of Allah be on us all. Assalamu alaikum.
Medabawasi. Assalamu alaikum.
La for hate for none all the time. La for hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for hate for none all the time. La for hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for hate for none all the time. La for hate for none, for Islam stand for peace. La for hate for none all the time. La for hate for HFO9, for Islam stand for peace.